What I'd like to do now is I'd like to invite Ashley. Ashley is the assistant professor at Harvard Business School. Negotiation, organization, market units, motivation, incentives, all of the some of the key strategic initiatives that Ashley is very adept at talking about. So Ashley, I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the stuff and the relationship, I suppose, between what we've talked about to some extent, time, money, and happiness. Welcome, Ashley.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I do really resonate on this point that Alex was making around norms. I'll kind of just say that I'm a social psychologist by training, and most of my research focuses on the interrelationships between time, money, and happiness, and in particular, the way that people shape their own narratives and value time and value money, and looking at the downstream impacts of this value that people place on time versus money on subjective well-being. I've also just wrote a book on this topic called Time Smart, How to Reclaim Your Time and Live a Happier Life. So I've been thinking a lot about these same issues that all of us on the phone today have been thinking about. And what really resonates, I'll share some of my insights about a time-first mindset, the downstream implications for this time-first mindset on subjective well-being. And then I want to share a little bit about some research I've been doing at a top management firm, looking at conversations around how to optimize going forward. So I think a lot of this conversation has been focused on the positives of workplace flexibility, but I think there's also is a strong need for more research on setting clear norms and discussions around what that flexibility is going to look like. And so I'll share a little bit of some insights that we're gleaning from some of our research in this forced experiment we're all in and working from home during COVID. So I want to just kind of start off with this quote that I think actually summarizes some of the comments I've been seeing in this chat window. So what Ed Diener is a subjective well-being researcher, and he says probably the biggest insight is that happiness is not just a place, but also a process. So happiness is an ongoing process of fresh challenges, and it takes the right attitude and activities to continue to be happy. So a lot of what we're talking about is keeping this growth mindset in trying to think about what a 4-day work week could look like, what could a flexible mindset look like, and not only how to structure time outside of work, but how to help employees be productive with the time that they have at work. So how do you both create this balance between creating enough time outside of work, but also maintaining efficient time at work? And so a lot of my research focuses on how to help people get more positive time, both within and outside of the workplace. So a lot of my research interest in this area came out of a lot of large-scale data sets that I have showing that people, although our work hours have been pretty constant, have never felt more time poor. So in large-scale surveys of working Americans that I've analyzed, about 3 million Americans, over 80% report feeling time poor, which is the feeling that they have too many things to do and not enough time to do them. And in some of the analyses my collaborators and I have run, these feelings of time poverty have similar effects, negative effects on happiness as unemployment. And time poverty has effects not just for knowledge workers, not just at the top end of the distribution, but people who are kind of middle and lower income workers are also disproportionately affected by time poverty due to something that Bridget Schultz and others have term time confetti. So lower income workers might be having to sustain themselves via multiple jobs, and so their time might actually be even more fragmented. And this feeling of fragmentation around time is a major psychological driver of our feelings of time poverty. So time poverty is part objective. The demands of our workplaces have gone up as the output that we're producing in many of our jobs is less clearly defined. So our promotions are based more on subjective evaluation, which means, we rely on heuristics like the person who spends longer in the office is the one who's doing quality work. So we start inflating in our minds using these heuristics of quality, since quality is now harder in our workplaces to determine. So it's partially real, these feelings of time poverty, but it's partially perceptions. We have these ideal worker norms that we rely on, both to evaluate our own and others' performance, but also our technology plays a role. So this is the idea of the autonomy paradox. Our technology was supposed to free us from always having to be in the office, but now we take the office everywhere with us. So it's the question then becomes, how do we create norms around communication and norms in our office, not only around the hours we're going to work, but how we're going to communicate with one another so that we have productive and freeing time at work while we're there. But just to kind of talk a little, and so one strategy that my colleagues and I, and that Alex had mentioned a little bit, is scheduling proactive time. So this is time where you're spending on important but not urgent tasks, and really thinking about time blocking and getting the entire team on board for a time first approach, where we're thinking about not being constantly available, but rather we're thinking about blocking time for ourselves, given that time is, and being time focused is not something that should be seen as a detriment to the team, but actually should be seen as a positive. This goes back with something Margaret was saying earlier, which I really liked and really resonates with a lot of the research I've done, is that broadly we need to think about taking a time first mindset as something that's pro-social as opposed to selfish. I think a lot of the conversation around putting money first, people say, well, I shouldn't do that, what other people rely on me. And really what I find over and over again in my surveys is that people who say they value time more than money, that they want to put time first in their lives, both personal and at work, not only are happier and are not only more efficient with the time that they spend working, but this actually frees them up to spend more time volunteering on an average week, and more time interacting both with their close friends and family, but also with weak ties in their social environment. So this idea and this rhetoric around time, or time flexibility being a nice to have versus a have to have, we spent a lot of the conversation talking about this, but I think we also need to see that being time focused is something that's pro-social as opposed to self-focused. And this is one thing I've seen in a lot of my case studies, where the rhetoric around time needs to change, can actually be something, if we all have more time, we're not only able to be more creative, but we're actually able to help others and to drive forward the mission of our companies. I think another interesting point that has come up in conversation is that I've shown in my own data that this time first mindset also does predict career satisfaction. And I've also noted in recent surveys that we should all be thinking about this as an opportunity. This forced experiment has caused us to change our norms and habits around the way we work and the way that we think about time versus money. I've seen in large scale survey data with college students that people more than ever are thinking about time and purpose. So if there was ever a moment to start having a time flexibility or implementing a 4-day work week, now is a perfect opportunity. People's habits are disrupted, so you can frame this as a fresh start, a new opportunity to try something different. And people across the age spectrum, not just the college students I've been tracking, are looking for ways to retain some of the positive elements of the working from home environment, spending more time with their families, and are really hungry to maintain some of this time focused, purpose focused, and reflective thinking that they've been doing during this work from home forced experiment. A couple of other points that I wanted to make are with regard to the qualitative data that I've been collecting. So I think a new frontier of conversation is, and I touched a little bit on this already, is not just, moving the conversation to a time-focused conversation in workplaces, which I think initiatives like the 4-day work week have really started to move the needle on, in terms of time being less of a taboo and more about something we can talk about and ask for, even at work. But also we need to begin the conversation to think about, how do we optimize the time off? So if we give everyone a day off, and maybe it's at different times, are we still interrupting each other or not? What are the norms that we're creating around the off times that we're building in? This I really see as from some of my interviews as sort of the new frontier of what we need to figure out as we build the future of work. My colleague and I have started to devise typologies of time, these building blocks, these essential fundamental nature of work that we're going to need, and that in the virtual environment don't always exist. I saw in some of the chats, boundaries, breaks, transition points, those have come up as key areas that are often missed in the virtual environment. Huddle time, so the sense making that happens after a major meeting, not just being in the meeting, but talking with your colleagues in the hallway about what that meeting meant. So observing and building in some of these different types of time into a virtual environment seems really important to understand these informal interactions that we're now missing and that employees are feeling that they're really missing out on, and also building in red light and green light time, very clearly communicated norms around when I'm going to be off and unavailable because I'm doing deep work time, or I'm working with my, I'm working on something in the house or spending time with my family, versus green light, I'm totally available, let's go, let's talk through an issue, let's have our virtual version of a hallway conversation. So as we begin to have these conversations around building in more time off, I think the conversation also needs to start including, well, what are the norms around of engagement? What does that time off look like, so that we can help employees not only have additional time off, but fully maximize it, fully enjoy it, and reap the rewards of it. So those are just a few of the insights that I've been sort of seeing in my deep qualitative research that I've been doing over the last few weeks, is really now is an optimal moment in time to harness this forced experiment and translate it into new norms going forward. I think there's never been a better time to be at the forefront of all of our minds. So let's capitalize on it. And as we do that, think very carefully around the norms of engagement, particularly around technology and teaming, and building in explicit times of social interactive time, deep work, and personal time, especially as in a virtual environment, the lines do become more blurred. That's all that I wanted to mention in response a lot to the conversation, but I'm very curious to hear the questions that arise for you, James, and I think this is a really important conversation to be having in this moment right now.